listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Welcome back to I Am Refocused Radio. Once again, we are here today, and man, I had to pinch myself when I found out what is going on in my email because I have another powerhouse guest today. We have the one and only Carol Lin. She is an award-winning journalist. You've seen her on the TV. I mean, come on. You all remember 9/11 when that happened. You know who was right there. I mean, frontline, just covering, doing amazing work. Well, I can't do justice and go throughout her whole resume because it'll probably take me the whole 25 minutes of the show. So I had to cut to the chase and say, Carol Lin, she is someone that is going to inspire you with her story. She has great taste, great professionalism, and she has a passion for what she does. And that's what we all love on this show. So I'm inspired already just in the intro having her on. First and foremost, I want to say to you, Carol, thank you for your time. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great, Shemaya. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be with you. What a great intro. Thank you.
Man, nervous as a cat because I have one in the house. So I appreciate you blessing us, having you be on the show to showcase what's possible when someone believes in their dreams and really makes it happen. So my first question to you is kind of take us behind the scenes in your career. You being to work for powerful platforms, having great responsibility to not just be transparent with viewers and readers, but also have the responsibility to carry out stories. And moments can be very heavy at times.
Indeed. I mean, that is the news. And it is a weighty responsibility, but also I step back and I think about a 20 plus year career as a journalist. The last 12 years of my career were at the network level at ABC News and at CNN. And I am filled with gratitude, but I also have a much deeper understanding looking back at that career, the toll that it can take. And to have perspective and context about it, you know, spending the last 2 years writing this memoir, When News Breaks, gives me more context on a life that was built upon, I hate to say it this way, Shemaya, but the tragedy of others, and hoping that the journalism, the reporting of it, allows for meaning and respect for the people who have been victimized by crime, by poverty, by history itself. That by telling story, that's what you're talking about, talking story, that we can forge deeper connections that may be more aspirational today, right, in this new media environment. But that is what I hope that we do even right here, right, connecting over story.
You write about pressure to stay calm and stay strong, don't show emotion. Where does that type of mindset come from? Because it's easier said than actually done out in the field. Yeah.
I think the biggest test of that in my career was breaking the news of 9/11. 25 years ago, if you can believe that, this year, Shemaya, that was a day that professionally I understood the weight of the job. You know, journalists, we're trained to be fast, we're trained to be accurate, we're trained to be composed through the experience of reporting live breaking news. But that day demanded something more. That day, there was no script. There was only the image of the burning tower of the World Trade Center. And it was a moment I remember that reinforced the importance of being present in moments of crisis, but being present overall in moments in our lives. And reflecting on that day and breaking that kind of news reminds me of the emotional cost of the work, because initially we didn't know what we were looking at. So, you know, whether it's me on the anchor desk at CNN reporting the first attack of the World Trade Center, or any one of us in our lives facing that breaking news moment when we remember the before moment and the during and then the after, where we have to live with the consequences of whatever the news it was that we got, the critical illness of a loved one, or the death of a loved one, or, the amazing moments in our lives too, the job that we always dreamed about, or the child we thought we'd never have. And I think about breaking news now in that bigger picture, right? And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book that came out in December, When News Breaks, because I wanted to play with that metaphor of what happens to any of us when news breaks in our lives.
A lot of times people will remember where they were. And when things like that happened, 9/11, I remember I was in middle school, and I remember our teachers were doing a great job trying to keep the calm, because to the students, we were like, okay, what's going on? I mean, today's world time, you probably have the ability to maybe text your parents and your friends and family like, hey, did you know what's going on? But back then, my day, not that old, but old enough, we didn't have that kind of instant, just send a message out and see what's going on. But everyone remembers where they were, and that time feel like just went very slow down. I remember watching the news that night with my parents, everyone misty-eyed, because we're like, wow, this is happening. There's no rehearsal, go back and start over. We're in the moment. Right.
And so there's that moment of history, Shemaiah, that you're talking about. And at a time, 2001, where the internet was something that was still very, very new. So you remember that feeling of being locked in, right? Like you're looking at the image, or you're hearing about something that happened in New York City. The information is still unclear, but by comparison to today, that information was rolling in relatively slowly in real time. And you didn't have the speculation of the worldwide conversation of what we're looking at. And then you think about that memory and how it's changed over time, right? So we remember where we were in that moment. And then we remember the first person we talked about, what's going on. And then we remember the news reports as they unfolded slowly. And yet at the same time, in that initial hour when it was the first attack, then the second plane hit, then you're looking at planes crashing into the Pentagon, a plane crashing into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And then the other stories begin to unpeel, right? The hero stories of the individuals who are on some of those planes, calling their loved ones, saying goodbye, giving their loved ones permission to live their best life, right? The husband who tells his wife, be happy, and whatever decision you make with the children, know it's the right decision. That's the kind of unpeeling and unpacking of a breaking news story that I always found fascinating, because it's not just the event itself, but it's the human story. It's how we relate to each other, and all those thoughts. Like, what would I say in that moment if I only had seconds left to talk to the one I love? What would I choose to say? And I think even in those last moments, as tragic as it was, there were great moments of humanity, right? And intimate moments between couples and parents and children. And all these years later, I've always been fascinated by that. And in some way, it gives me hope that we as people have this very deep well to draw upon, right? So when we face breaking news in our own lives, that we are more than the moment, and that moment is going to evolve and it's going to teach us.
Once again, listen to Refocus Radio and watching us online, talking to our guest today, Carol Lin. Go to her website, because we're talking about her book, When News Breaks. Go to her website, carollinnow.com. Again, that's carollinnow.com. My next question for you is, when you think about pressure and performance in media, you lived it overseas, not just here in the United States, but traveling the world. You've been able to experience different cultures and just a whole buffet line of emotions. When you think about how your performance is always being checked by executives and viewers and different opinions, how did that consistent pressure help shape your self-worth and your confidence as you had to daily deliver?
You know, when I chose a career to be judged, to always be living in the gaze of others, to be reliant on their opinion, the viewership, where people watching me could be measured on a Nielsen scale, right? I could walk into the station and see the ratings report and a black line that goes up or down. I could trace exactly where I am on that line and see whether viewers tuned in or tuned out. I lived a life where we had viewer feedback. I mean, before the internet, right? People would call or they'd write letters, and they'd write everything from whether my voice was too friendly or whether my face was too stern, or, criticizing my appearance or even my very presence. Now, that seems very quaint by today's internet standards, right? Where people can just comment cruelly or otherwise instantaneously. But by then, I had shaped myself in the image of others, right? So, or what people expected of me. And I think it's a different environment when you grow up as one of the very few people of color on national television. So not just female, Asian American female, right? But anyone of color. There were so few people back in the 1990s. And even then, we were the reliable weekend face, right? To get on weekday primetime was always the goal, because that's where the numbers were. That's where the audience was. That's the real estate that the executives valued the most. And so, I noticed in the book, there's a point when you write a book that the book sort of begins to write itself, and these metaphors of mirrors and seeing myself in the reflection would recur throughout the book. And I would judge myself so harshly, Shemaiah. Now I look back on it and I thought, why couldn't I love myself more? And it's because I was listening to the cacophony of what other people thought I should be, right? An agent telling me not to wear brown because it wasn't flattering to my skin tone, or suggesting maybe I might consider having some plastic surgery to Anglicanize my face. These were open conversations at the time. And I think it took a personal turning point, a personal tragedy in my life to shake me out of that and realize that I am enough. Because I am walking this walk of grief, and the mere fact that I show up is something to be applauded, right? And I think that's something that for all of us who feel that we live in the gaze and the judgment of others, that when we show up and we show up for our community, that can be enough. I think that's what years, that's the wisdom that is accumulated over the years, that we can love ourselves and appreciate ourselves for the energy we put towards our own healing, right? And to recognize that success that we, as we had defined it in our teens and 20s and maybe our 30s, was not really success. It was a form of becoming. And that walk can be tough, especially when you listen to the noise. So I hope I'm answering the question, because I think that it's so important for the readers to know that even someone who sat at the height of her profession could have those kinds of self-doubts, and then to realize years later that those are the moments that form us, right? And to not be afraid of the fear and having the confidence that you can overcome it. Because living in the gaze of others is a terrible place to be, unless we make the choice to define ourselves, to come up with our own rules about who we are.
Kind of like what we discussed earlier with 9/11, it's very normal for humans to have experiences of certain emotions. I don't care how big you think you are, or how important you think you are, or whatever you are. You still gonna have life happen, and life is always going to test you. And speaking of that, when you think about how fast-paced your industry was and still is today, people are replaceable and they can be moved and pushed to the side in a blink of the eye. How were you able to stay grounded, understanding that the value in your industry could be questioned at any moment?
Honestly, I don't think that happens until you get to the other side. For me, I think I was, at the height of my career on 9/11. After that moment on the anchor desk, I reported overseas, and I would continue to go overseas, reporting for CNN International, which was truly an honor because your stories were seen worldwide, globally, 24/7 on repeat. And you could really have a place of influence. Your journalism could have a place of influence. But it wasn't until my husband was diagnosed with cancer when we were 6 months pregnant that I was on maternity. And then eventually when he was in a critical portion of his treatment phase, he did live to see our baby born. But it wasn't until that moment, it wasn't until the personal breaking news happened that I really think I learned who I really am. That I'm more than a career, that I'm more than the last mistake that I made, that imperfection is the pursuit of a life well lived, a meaningful life. And so it wasn't, that realization, that self-acceptance didn't happen in the career. What happens in the career is if you're so fortunate, you get the promotion, you get the accolades, you get the awards. And certainly there was that, but always knowing you could look, you had to look back and you had to look way forward and have a plan because this was never going to last forever. Some of the most notable names in broadcast journalism were replaced. Walter Cronkite, the most trusted name in news for our parents' generation, was unceremoniously replaced. So the inevitability of that doesn't feel inevitable when you're in it, because you're working so hard to keep it. But it's only when you lose it, when you experience the kind of loss where you feel like you would give anything to have that other back. I would give anything to have the father of my baby back. So it wasn't the career that I was begging for. It was the relationship, right? And the community that had formed around that relationship. And so I think for anyone going through their own breaking news, you're not going to know how resilient you are when you're in the fight. You're going to see it and I hope appreciate it when you look back and say, you know what? I'm still here. I did it. I can start the healing.
So again, listen, I Refocus Radio and watching us online, talking to our guest today, Carol Lin. Go to her website, carolinnow.com. Again, that's carolinnow.com. We're talking about her book, When News Breaks. I want to touch on part of the story with your husband, because you kind of answered my next question I had in mind. That is the topic of love from a family standpoint, from that lens. You understand what it's like to describe something in a 90-second segment. But when you think about love and the perspective of building relationships, not just professionally, but continuing to build it with your loved ones personally, what are some things that has taught you about life versus what a career could never teach?
Oh, gosh, that is such a great question. That is deep. Boy, the Bible tells us that love is patient and love is kind, but I would say love is complicated. And I think love is sometimes choice. One of the themes that I explore in the book is the big question. That's what they called it in my writing program. And the big question was, why do we love who we love? And when, if ever, is the right time to let go? And letting go can mean a lot of different things. You know, when someone betrays you or when you betray them, is that the time? How do you know that your love is worth fighting for? And, you know, my daughter asked me that question. Her biological father, my first husband in the book, Will, and I walked through fire, and there was love there. I mean, we were two journalists with a passion for each other and a passion for the news, and a complicated relationship with each other and our work. You know, the work brought us together. It sometimes tore us apart. It helped us reconcile and see the deeper meaning of life, especially in the months after 9/11, when we decided to try to start a family. And I think that what love taught me is the power of staying. Staying's hard. Leaving's easy. And there was a lot of leaving in the book. You know, there's the literalness of getting on a plane, of choosing a career that constantly takes you away from the people you love. What kind of person is that? You know, what kind of person was I? I could say, well, it was the work. I had to go. But, you know, that was a conscious choice. And it came at a time when our marriage was really in trouble, and I needed that distance, and work became, you know, that contract with ABC News became what defined me, not my marriage, not my relationship, because it had to at that time in order to probably save the relationship. We needed that distance. And at the same time, you know, when my daughter asked, why'd you stay? Because she was going through her own issues with her first love. Should I stay? Should I go? And, you know, what came to mind, Shemaiah, was family. You know, a vow that I made, the promise I made to my mother privately, yes, he's the one, and all the reasons why, and the complicated interconnections that I had with him and he had with my mom and my mom had with our family history and what it means to be family. And that is a theme that I explore, you know, even on the reporting from the border of Afghanistan and living with a warlord where he was trying to explain to me what is the meaning of tribe, right? Tribe is the family that is there for you when the elements are so hostile outside the village compound that you have no other choice but to make it work. You are each other's ride or die. And that's going to be different for everyone. But for me, I think the reflection in the book is, if not for Will, my husband, then for my daughter, I had to learn to change. I had to recognize the woman I had become, who was not going to be the mother she deserved unless I made some fundamental changes in my life, which also meant making those changes in my career. And that was hard. So love is sacrifice. It's compromise. It's a conscious decision to be in it for the long game, but for the right reasons. And I think those reasons are going to differ for everyone. But for me, in a career that, again, took me away from the people I loved all the time, I had to learn to be present. That's what love is in my life, showing up.
And you said the word sacrifice. I want to double down that because you also have stories with your parents. Both mom and dad, they give advice. They help us kind of, okay, here's what you could, excuse me, here's what you could do. Mm-hmm. What were some things that you appreciate from both your mom and dad that helped shape your ambition?
They were such different people. And my mom, Joanne, is definitely comic relief in the book. So my dad had such a deep faith that I could be anything I wanted to be in this great country. You know, they were Chinese immigrants escaping communism in mainland China. They left everything behind. We all know that story, to come to this country and make their way. At a time, it was the McCarthy era, so there was, you know, ethnic persecution against Chinese people in particular, because that country had fallen to the communists, and America was living in fear, okay, of the unknown. And but he believed in America. He believed that his American-born daughter could be anything she wanted to be. And books, reading, a sense of curiosity was the pathway forward. My mother, however, was the pragmatist. She believed that words could trick you, that if you loved words, the words would never love you back. And when I first told her that I was interested in becoming a journalist, you'd have thought that I said I wanted to be a prostitute. I mean, she was astounded. And why not be an engineer? Why not be a teacher? Why not be a nurse? Go into the sciences, go into fields where either American society was already ready to accept you in that role, make your life easier, look forward to getting married and having children. That's the life you want, Carol. And so with my father on one end and my mother on the other, there was a sense of rebellion, but also to fulfill my father's dream, because he died when I was a young woman, didn't really see me fully realize my journalism career. But he was a big driving force in, I have to believe that my mother is wrong and my father is right. But both coming from a place of love. I think that's thinking about my relationship with them and their relationship with this country. Really, again, you talk about the lessons of love. And I don't think we hear enough about it today, the sacrifice that parents make for a better life for their children. The deep desire that we as parents have for our children to excel, and for them, for my mother, it was, how is my daughter, my plain Jane daughter, going to survive in an American world where, beauty products are advertised on television, and that telegraphed to her what the values of this society was, the values that she never thought that I could attain. So why not be practical, And I think there was that push me, pull you throughout the book of me wrestling with my identity and what I could be versus what I was, and what are the boundaries and the limits of that life, of the life choice that I made to enter this crazy career where, you could be fired every 3 years.
You have seen history unfold in real time, not just in news break, but in personal life, our own lives. We get up, go to work, go home, repeat the cycle, plan for retirement. When you see history on both sides of the aisle, I should say aisle, when you see both through both lenses, what has that taught you about life?
That it can change, that no matter what we see today, that's not the last story. History is always in the making. And I know you just asked me a very big question, but I want to take us back to the moment before we started recording, and you and I were talking, and you were telling me a little bit about how unexpected it is to have such a successful show and to have this career that you have now. And who knew, right? Who knew? And you think about the year before or the 6 months before this opportunity came to you. And in your own way, you're making history with newsmakers and elevating voices that might go unheard. And so it's not that much different, witnessing history, because you don't know when you're in history. You just have to have faith that you're part of this continuum. And that's what it is. It's a continuum. What we're seeing politically today in our country is not anything new. I mean, you can go all the way back to the presidency of Andrew Jackson to see the chaos that existed in, our nation's capital, if you will, and our country. A lot of the things that are happening, the conversations that are happening now publicly, the ugliness has always been there. And I like a quote from U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, may she rest in peace, where she was asked about the future of our country. And her response was, that she believed that the symbol of our country should not be the American eagle, but rather it should be the pendulum, because somehow our country always finds its way back from one side to the other to the center. And whenever I read the headlines today, I remind myself of that quote, because if we don't have hope that there is change possible in our democracy, then we have nothing, right? So witnessing history, we could be in it right now. I mean, you and me in this moment. We don't know who's going to be listening to this. We don't know how it's going to impact them. We don't know. And that's kind of the beauty and the fun of it, right? Is that sense of discovery. And that's what I want to encourage people, not to be discouraged, but to be encouraged and to be curious, because that's what it's like to witness history.
Once again, been watching Refocus Radio, listening to us on the airways, talking to our special guest today, Carol Lin. Go to her website, carollinnow.com, and get a copy. Get 2 copies. Get multiple copies. Tell a friend, tell a neighbor, tell a loved one. When News Breaks is available, and you need to get a copy today. Like I always say, I've been doing it since the beginning of the year. If you do me a big favor, just do it one time. That's all it takes. One share, and you'd be surprised how things can shape after that. So once again, to our special guest, Carol, thank you for your time.
Loved it. Thank you, Shemaiah.